You are listening to The Briefing, first broadcast on the 26th of February 2025 on Monocle Radio. Hello and welcome to The Briefing, broadcasting live from Studio One here at Midori House in London. I'm Chris Chermak. Coming up on today's program.
I hear that he's coming on Friday. Certainly it's okay with me if he'd like to, and he would like to sign it together with me, and I understand that's a big deal, a very big deal.
Ukraine signs a minerals deal with the United States, but will this help it secure peace as well? We'll speak with Olga Tokaryuk in just a moment. After that,
the protests are very, very peaceful in Slovakia. You can see these instances like there is electricity outage in the protests and people just calmly turn on their mobile phones and start singing the anthem. But he's trying to create an impression that this is some kind of coup d'etat or something.
A look at demonstrations against Prime Minister Robert Fico in Slovakia. We'll also profile the Japanese whiskey industry, ask if a bubble is coming to an end there, and take a look at the International Booker Prize's long list. All that right here on The Briefing with me, Chris Chermak. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is likely to travel to Washington, D.C. on Friday to sign a rare earth minerals deal that has been hammered out with the Trump administration. According to Donald Trump, the deal allows Ukraine to, quote, fight on, though it does not include any of the long-term security guarantees that Ukraine continues to seek. So what does the minerals deal include, and what does it mean for Ukraine's long-term future? Joining us now is the Ukrainian journalist Olga Tokaryuk. Olga, always great to have you on the show. Let's start with the deal itself. What do we know about what is in this agreement?
Hello, Chris, and thank you for having me. Well, to be frank, we do not know much. The text of the deal has not been published yet. There is a very vague idea of what is actually in it. And Ukrainian officials said that basically this is a compromise, that the U.S. had to compromise on the deal. And Ukraine also had to make compromises after a very heated exchange of the war of words last week between the U.S. President Trump and Ukraine's President Zelensky. So the media sources in the U.S., they suggest that the deal could include a long-term financial commitment between the U.S. and Ukraine, that Ukraine would contribute 50% of its revenue from minerals, oil, and gas infrastructure and ports into an investment fund. And this fund could be co-managed by the U.S., with the U.S. having 100% interest in it. There are also rumors that this money will then be reinvested in Ukraine to favor its reconstruction. But again, I want to stress that we do not know exactly what's in the deal. Hopefully more details will emerge soon. And also some Ukrainian MPs, they actually have complained that they haven't seen the deal, that the President Zelensky is likely to travel, as you said, on Friday to D.C. to meet with Trump and to sign it. And the most recent statement coming from Ukraine is that of Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal, who said that there will be some security guarantees, a separate document discussing that attached to this deal on Ukraine's minerals. He said there will be kind of a package, that it doesn't really make sense for Ukraine to sign only the deal on minerals without getting anything in return. But as far as we know, it's not contained in the minerals deal that is likely to be signed on Friday by Trump and Zelensky.
And just to clarify, perhaps, Olga, when you talk about elements of this deal, this sort of fund that's being created also for Ukraine's reconstruction, even if we don't know all the details yet, as you say, is it the understanding of Ukrainians or in the Ukrainian media as well that this is a deal that will actually help to fund Ukraine in the future as well? Because I did wonder throughout this, whether the U.S. is kind of looking basically to get money back for the money it has put into Ukraine up to this point, or whether there is more of a provision for Ukraine to get funding going forward.
Yeah, that's one of those crucial things that are not exactly clear. And President Trump said that in return, Ukraine will get the right to fight on. What does that mean? Does that mean that the U.S. is going to continue supplying Ukraine with weapons, continuous military support? We don't know yet. So kind of what we know at this moment and the statements and the details that have been, coming in the press do not give a clear understanding of whether there will be continuous U.S. support or whether this deal is just somehow making Ukraine pay for the aid that has already been provided, as was the initial idea, floated by Trump. But since there have been negotiations on this deal. The Ukrainians were kind of also making clear some things that they are not ready to concede. I think this was definitely one of the crucial things for Kyiv. They insisting that Ukraine needs to get security guarantees. It needs to ensure the U.S. Support in the future as well. So hopefully they manage to do that. We don't know yet.
And tell us more about, I suppose, the rare earth minerals that exist in Ukraine. How has that discussion been going on in Ukraine, where these are, how they've been developed until now, and what might happen with them if there is a deal going forward?
Well, this... Let's start with the fact that actually this idea about access to Ukraine's rare earths and critical minerals, it was the idea of President Zelensky suggested, to the U.S. Last year. So this is the idea that initially came from the Ukrainian government, obviously not in that form and shape that, it was later interpreted and presented and kind of pressured on Kyiv by the new U.S. administration. There are some estimates, that Ukraine has deposits of titanium, zirconium, graphite, lithium, and rare earths, and they are located mostly in central and eastern Ukraine. Some of these minerals are located actually on Russian-occupied territories. And the process of extraction of these minerals, it's a long process. It requires a lot of investment. It requires a lot of time and a lot of effort. So the potential financial reward from this deal is not something that the U.S. or Ukraine will see, in the near future. This is something for years and decades to come. So apparently, my take on this deal now is that the U.S. President Trump, he needs to have a victory. He made so many different statements since coming to power on, his intentions, what he, wants to do with Greenland, with Panama, with Canada, with Gaza, and then with Ukraine. But that's actually the first tangible result that he achieved. So this deal, if it is signed on Friday, is something that Trump can show to the Americans and say, look, I've delivered on one of my promises. And I think that's why Ukrainians also ultimately agreed to it. I'm not sure there is a lot of substance in this deal. I'm not sure it will actually lead to any real world results. But in terms of appealing to Trump's ego and letting him have a victory, that's definitely what this deal does.
Donald Trump perhaps gets a victory through this, but more importantly, one would argue Ukraine needs a victory for its own fight against Russia at this moment. Just finally and quickly on that, what is the sense of Ukrainians about this deal? Is this going to help them achieve their own victory?
I do not think Ukrainians have a lot of trust in the new U.S. administration, since this first few weeks, and a lot of statements coming from Donald Trump and the circle and other American officials that are very favorable to Russia. And also, with this deal, why was Ukraine the country that was, pressured into making some concessions, whereas Russia is not? And there are, meetings with Russian and American officials going on that Ukrainians are not invited to. There are talks that, have happened last week, and just recently, Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov said there will be another round of talks later this week in Istanbul between the U.S. and Russian representatives. So I do not think that this deal solves the fundamental issue of trust in the U.S. On behalf of Ukrainians that has been severely undermined in recent weeks.
Olga Tokarczuk, Ukrainian journalist, thank you very much for joining us, as always. And now here's Hassan Anderson with the day's other news headlines.
Thanks, Chris. Israeli and Hamas officials say the latest impasse in the Gaza ceasefire deal has been resolved by mediators. Israel had delayed the release of 600 Palestinian prisoners on Saturday in protest over the treatment of Israeli hostages being handed over by Hamas. Hamas said this was a serious violation of the deal. China's military has set up a zone for live fire training without advance notice, just 74 kilometers off the southwestern coast of Taiwan. It comes a day after Taiwan's Coast Guard detained a Chinese crude cargo ship suspected of cutting an undersea cable in the Taiwan Strait. Taiwan's defense ministry says it has detected 32 Chinese military aircraft in the region. And South Korea's fertility rate increased in 2024, breaking a 9-year downtrend. The news comes as the country has been suffering from a demographic crisis with a low birth rate and an increase in the elderly population for nearly a decade. Despite the rebound, South Korea's birth rate will likely remain at the lowest level among 38 member nations of the Organization for the Economic Development and Cooperation. Those are the day's headlines. Back to you, Chris.
Thanks very much, Hassan. There has been no shortage of controversy since Robert Fico was re-elected as Prime Minister of Slovakia in 2023. Much like Viktor Orban in neighbouring Hungary, he has been accused of dismantling the country's democratic institutions and steering Slovakia away from the European Union and closer to Russia. His distrust of the liberal opposition, NGOs and independent media has only deepened following an unsuccessful assassination attempt last summer. But discontent with his government is also mounting. Over the past 2 months, Slovaks have staged some of the largest opposition demonstrations in the country's history. Monocle's Alexei Korolyov reports from the Slovak capital, Bratislava.
Robert Fico's return to the premiership was always going to be divisive. Some of his government's early moves, the dismantling of a special prosecutor's office that targeted high-level corruption, the restructuring of the public broadcaster, the increasingly nationalist tone, had already sparked concern and protest. But it was Fico's latest actions that, for many, were a step too far.
Prime Minister Robert Fico visited the mass murderer Vladimir Putin in Moscow without any authorization and without any apparent reason a few days before Christmas. He crossed the red line with this visit. It's not normal. We need to do something. And we call for the small protest in front of the government building.
Lucia Štaselová is a former deputy mayor of Bratislava who now runs Peace for Ukraine, an NGO supporting Ukrainian refugees in Slovakia.
After that, we decided that we have to organize a real protest, big protest against the entire government, which is turning the direction of Slovakia away from the European community towards Russia. And we feel that it is on the air that people are not satisfied and they are really, really very angry.
Both in Parliament and in his frequent video messages on social media, Fico insists that the protests are part of a coup, a sinister foreign-funded plot to overthrow him.
The protests are very, very peaceful in Slovakia. You can see these instances like there is electricity outage in the protests and people just calmly stand, turn on their mobile phones and start singing the anthem. But he's trying to create an impression that this is some kind of coup d'etat or something, which is clearly not the case, and the parallels he's trying to draw are false, but amplified by social media. It's not so surprising that some people, fall into those narratives.
A fresh round of rallies has been announced for this Friday. As with the previous ones, they will take place in cities across the country, not just in liberal Bratislava. So what do people in Slovakia's heartland make of the Prime Minister and his embrace of Moscow? Professor Martin Kahanec is a political scientist and expert in economics at Central European University in Vienna. He held an advisory role in a previous Slovak government, and earlier this month, he set off on a research trip.
I'm traveling around Slovakia a little bit now, and you can feel this from the people that these topics are very much alive. You go to a protest, and then you go to the National Theatre. There is an actor who comes on the stage with the flag, and the whole audience bursts in applause. Yes? You can also sense it in rural areas. You go into the local pub, and you can feel the change in the mood.
now, as you see the reaction and how fast other cities are joining our activities, the situation and the feeling among the people is much more stronger than we saw.
Back to protest organizer Lucia Staselova for some final thoughts. Robert Fico has already been forced to step down once before, in 2018, following Slovakia's first murder of a journalist. What could this latest, and by far strongest, wave of public discontent lead to?
People are angry and they saw what is Fico doing, and this is really terrible. Every day he come out with some kind of lie, new lies. Now people are laughing and they don't believe him. So people feel that enough is enough and they don't feel so alone. Now, really, this feeling, it is not rational, it is emotional. You know, people are glad that we are organizing, that they thank us. I'm not sure if we change immediately something, but at least the feeling in the society has changed.
For Monocle in Bratislava, I'm Alexei Korolev.
Alexei Korolev in Bratislava, thank you very much. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. This is The Briefing. I'm Chris Chermak. Japanese whiskey has been around for about a century, but it has surged in popularity overseas since 2010. Over that time, it's also become something of a stable investment, but that time may now be coming to an end. There is talk of a bursting bubble in the sector. And joining us now is Whiskey Richard, a whiskey distiller, sake sommelier, and editor-in-chief of Nomunication, a website about the Japanese drinks industry. Whiskey, great to have you on the show. Tell us, first of all, what is unique about Japanese whiskey? What attracted global attention?
Sure. Thank you for having me, Chris. So in terms of the global scene, I think the Japanese whiskey's popularity came about because I think of the sort of attention to detail that a lot of Japanese distillers have. Specifically, the palates of Japanese whiskey tend to be a little bit more delicate than whiskeys, say, in Scotland or the US. And also, there was a lot of emphasis, I think, on the fact that there was some mystique associated with Japanese whiskey as well. Of the major whiskey producing regions in the world, Japan was the only one where English is not the first language.
Tell us more about this mystique. Is that where it comes from, simply that it's not the English language, or where else does that mystique come from?
Well, also there was the Karuizawa distillery, for example. That was a distillery that closed shop in the early 2000s. So as a result, there was a bit of a scramble, I think, to get these, kind of vanishingly rare Japanese whiskeys, at the luxury end of the market. And so I think that a lot of the early emphasis on Japanese whiskey was the fact that, it's something that really you can't get your hands on very easily. So, in the whiskey world, we use this phrase, fear of missing out. So I think that was a lot of the driver for that as well.
So tell us more then about if there was this fear of missing out, this interest in Japanese whiskey, particularly in the last 10 to 15 years. Tell us about that moment, kind of how this, maybe if there is a bubble, how this bubble built within the industry in the first place.
I think that what we saw towards the latter part of the noughts, 2008, 2009, was you saw Japanese whiskey getting highlighted more on the global stage. So, winning more awards at, global whiskey competitions, being highlighted, in various books as, top, single malt in the world, that kind of thing. That sort of, I think, turned the world's attention to Japanese whiskey. Not only the fact that it was rare, but also the fact that it was, really high quality. And that sort of came about, in the early noughts. But then what we saw is a lot of more craft distilleries came online as a result of that, looking at sort of the global demand and saying, hey, we want a piece of that.
And so this is how it developed over the last 10 years or so, also these other distilleries coming in. Tell us about this moment now, because I do understand that at the moment there is a bit of a bubble in the industry. Is that from kind of oversupply or a lack of demand or both?
So what we see now is I think that there's within the last, say 10, 12 years, there's been an absolute explosion in the number of Japanese distilleries. And I think that on the consumer end, a lot of, whiskey drinkers have maybe kind of confused the fact that a lot of Japanese whiskey that's out there, especially outside of Japan, a lot of the Japanese whiskey that's out there, it may say Japanese whiskey on the label, but the reality is that they're using, imported Scotch, imported bourbon, and then they label it as a Japanese whiskey and then export it. So I think there's a lot of confusion in the marketplace as well. And I think that consumers may have grown tired of that. But realistically, a lot of the demand for more higher end, luxury Japanese whiskeys was coming from China. And with the economic downturn that China's seen within the last couple of years, there's also been a slight downturn in the demand for Japanese whiskey globally.
And what needs to happen now then, if there is a slowdown in China and then there's this combination that you're describing of some whiskeys that aren't actually Japanese? I mean, what do you expect to happen now in the industry? How do they, I guess, fight back to avoid this bubble bursting completely?
Right. So there is some new sort of standards that the industry has introduced that took effect in April 2024. Those standards are set out to sort of create a sort of set of requirements that say that, it has to be actually distilled in Japan. It has to be matured in Japan 100%. Otherwise, you're not able to call it Japanese whiskey. So the industry is trying to protect sort of the brand name of Japanese whiskey globally. But on top of that, I think in terms of number of distilleries, there's also going to be probably some consolidation within the next, 3 to 5 years. I think a lot of the distilleries that have come online, they're so small that they don't quite have the resources, I think, to build their name out on the global market, which is sort of required for them to be sustainable going forward.
I mean, is there, in that sense, could this be a good thing in your mind? Is it sort of a consolidation of the industry that creates something that, isn't a bubble or an industry that doesn't have enough demand? It kind of creates a more stable culture going forward.
Absolutely. And I think that to me, it's more a sign of Japanese whiskey not being something exotic, not being something unattainable. It's a sign to me of more maturity in the market. People know that Japanese whiskey is a thing now. It's here to stay. The question is, okay, well, does that mean we really need 127 distilleries, or does that mean we're happy with 90 or we're happy with 75, things like that? And I think that what we really need to have from the Japan side is more on the supply end. There might be a lot of distilleries, but they're so small that the actual, volume of total liquid isn't quite where it needs to be yet.
And just finally then, Whiskey Richard, give us your favorite whiskey recommendations, if you could. Which whiskeys should we be trying that are out there right now?
I think at this point, everybody's already had, the Suntory. Everybody's probably had the Nika. So my suggestion at the moment is going to be Kanosuke. It's a distillery down in Kagoshima. They're doing some amazing things using, say, ex-shochu casks. And the location is absolutely fantastic, right on the beach, fantastic sunsets. That's something to keep an eye out for.
I was going to say, so you not only can try the whiskey, but you can visit the distillery in its beautiful location as well.
Absolutely, yes. It's phenomenal.
Whiskey Richard, thank you very much for joining us today. This is The Briefing. You are back with The Briefing, and finally on today's show, the International Booker Prize has whittled down the list of finalists for 2025 from around 154 books to the lucky number 13. And here to tell us more about the finalists and what these books tell us about the world today is Max Porter, International Booker Prize 2025 Chair of Judges. Max, it's great to have you on the show. First of all, how difficult is your job as the chair of judges? You've gone from 154 to 13. How do you even choose?
I mean, it might be about to get a bit more difficult. So far, it's been kind of joyful. I mean, the reading is a lot. 154 books is a lot. it kind of forces you to read in a bit of an insane way, and perhaps not the kindest way to treat books, to roar through them at that speed. So I'm really chuffed about to have got to this stage and now to be able to reread and think about things a bit more slowly. But generally we've been very collegiate. We've disagreed a lot, which I think is really healthy. We live in a problematic world, and there's no reason why judging books shouldn't also be a bit problematic. So we've kind of learned a lot from each other. It's been very joyful. I've loved it.
Well, and tell us a little more about your process then. If you do have to read these quickly, nonetheless, you are a judge trying to pick the best among the best books in the world to get down to 13. So how do you even go about that?
Well, what happens is we meet every sort of 25 or 30 books. We meet and discuss a batch of books. And what we're trying to discuss is simultaneously the quality of the translation, because this is unique, this prize, in half the money goes to the translator. So we're very interested in what the translation is doing, the extent to which this has become a good book in English, irrespective of what it was in its origin language. We've got very different tastes. So some of us want different things from books. Some of us want books to be, so there's questions of pure reading pleasure. There's questions of style, questions of form, questions of sentence level brilliance, which is often to do with the musicality or not of the translation. Generally, we found as we came to our long list of 13, we found ourselves agreeing on the kind of desire to be shown, to have kind of revelatory experiences about the way that other people think. I think that's what our long list is characterized by, is these extraordinary and very diverse and interesting ways, mirrors into the way other people are kind of dealing with the strangeness of life on this planet at the moment.
Well, Max, I want to ask you more about the themes, but before that, I'm curious about the translation aspect that you were talking about there, because, we live in a world of artificial intelligence and all of these things where I think some people listening to this would suggest, what's so difficult about a translation? I've done translation work as a journalist from German into English. Tell us about that process and what you look for. What makes the translation special?
Well, I mean, AI is a really good example because increasingly a lot of translations will be done, particularly for technical materials, will be done by AI. With literature, you are looking at the single most human material that can be exchanged between languages. You're looking at the nuances of human consciousness and human language and slang and political and socioeconomic feeling, but also primarily because this is the novel we're talking about. This is the art form of ambivalence, of weird gray areas, of disguised erotic feeling or bubbling things under the surface of political anger and so on and so forth. So what you're looking for in a translation is something that feels like it has captured the indescribable, whether it's, the gossip of Muslim women or the cold bureaucratic language of a processing center. You're looking for a translation that seems to have got it. And then you're also looking for pure quality. You're looking for quality of prose in English. And they're not always the same thing. And what I liked about my fellow judges is that we have a very different idea of how visible a translator should be, or the translation should be. And, we learned a lot. One of our judges is a translator, and he taught us a lot about what the translation has actually had to do, particularly when you're moving between, Japanese and English, for example. These are profoundly different languages. And the translation is a whole rebuilding of the work into a new language with new colloquialisms, with new syntax, with new energy. So it's not, moving between European languages is perhaps closer to our ordinary experience, but sometimes these books are moving between huge chasms of cultural nuance. So that's what the kind of thinking we want readers to do, really. And that's why I read so much translated fiction, is because I want to be kind of analytical in my reading about what I'm receiving. Where has it come from? How has it changed? What has been lost? These are good and productive conversations for a reader to have in their own head.
And Max, when you talked about the themes, you mentioned sort of putting us in other people's shoes. I do wonder if you could speak more about these themes also in the sort of challenging world we live in today. Were you looking for, do people want distraction from that, or are these books really about leaning into the challenges of today?
Yeah, they lean in. They really do. I mean, they'll distract you with the power and the quality of their storytelling, but they lean into it. We've got books about division, about displacement, about sort of the weird existential malaise of millennials. We've got A Woman Trapped in Time. We've got books from the future about fertility and how human beings will survive beyond the paradigm shift of AI. We've got, deeply spoilt European inheritance. We've got gangster daughters in Mexico. We've really got this extraordinary range of sort of the challenges facing us all. And what these books all are is kind of unflinching. They do throw you in. They at times, that's one of the joys of translated literature, is this question of feeling less alone. So if you are feeling like the world is crushingly strange, unjust place, then you can find many voices around you that might agree or disagree with you, especially in the kind of echo chambers of our social media and the way our media is owned, and in some instances not even news. It's just pure propaganda. Then what these books give you is the sort of the stuff that you don't find in the news. As I said, the ambiguous, the uncanny, the ways in which our selves are being fractured, and that to me is a miracle, really, A, of translation, but B, of the global community of readers, that this stuff leaps over the borders that have been erected between us to show you. I was really pleased to read, for example, let me see, let's just pick one almost at random. This book Perfection by Vincenzo Latronico. This is a book about sort of Instagram obsessed millennials living in a Berlin flat, and I would roll my eyes at such a thing. And feel I have a pretty good handle on what they're feeling and experiencing. But it's done so beautifully that actually it becomes sort of about all of us. It becomes about how do we live now? How are we looking at one another? How are we processing our feelings? And what are the socioeconomic contexts by which we make any utterance? All our language is prescribed. So yeah, in each of their ways, they sort of make us less alone. So I know that sounds like a grand statement to make for a list of 13 books, but they profoundly do that, I think.
Max, I won't hold you to that one suggestion as if that was the winner, but good luck whittling this list down from 13 to 1. Max Porter, International Booker Prize 2025 Chair of Judges. Thank you very much for joining us. That's all the time we have for this edition of The Briefing. It was produced by Tom Webb and Ryuma Takahashi. Our researcher was Maisie Ringer, and our studio manager was Flynn Simons. The Briefing is back tomorrow at the same time. I'm Chris Chermak. Goodbye, and thanks for listening.